Hi viewers, welcome you all to the 37th edition of the Mysore Sport YouTube channel. Today we have with us Srimati Sanjana Kiran, a high performance sports psychologist who has been working with different countries and rendering a service to the sports fraternity throughout the sporting scene and has been accepted as one of the renowned sports psychologists in the sports scene in our country. On behalf of the Mysore Sport YouTube channel, I welcome her to our show. She is basically born and brought up in Mysore and has risen to this level of being a top sports psychologist in the country. Namaste, welcome you to our chat show, Srimati Sanjana Kiran.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's really a privilege to be on your show. I hear you're doing a lot of things for Mysore Sport, and I thought I should also contribute a little bit. So I hope this will be worth the viewers' time. Thanks.
First of all, how did you start basically loving sport, and tell us about your early days in Mysore, being a Mysorean?
I was a student at St. Joseph's Banimanta, and we used to have a lot of time playing outside. We used to do kho-kho, we used to do throw ball, then we had a jungle gym and all of that. And somehow I found myself to like the outdoors more than inside the classroom, although it was an amazing school. Then I moved
Which
to
school was that?
St. Joseph's Banimanta.
Yeah.
Yeah. We didn't have a high school then, so I moved to King Convent. And King Convent had a lot of sports to offer. They had a good sports culture.
True.
And for me, anyways, I was not interested in education. And there was no pressure from family to perform well in studies. We were basically sent to schools to spend our time in a good way till they look for an arranged marriage. That was how the conversation was, and I was okay with it. So my sports became a good reason to stay out of the classroom. And I had a few friends who also had a lot of interest in sports. So we used to go to these different meets at JK ground, learn new sports, train ourselves, and represent in the next meet. And our only goal would be, to get cups and shields to the school, and as long as it gave us good reason to stay out of classroom, then we were happy.
How did you take it on further from there?
I could not actually, because it was very clear in my head that with my family, once you complete 10th, you don't do boys stuff, because I come from a very loving but conservative family, and I accepted it. Then I did my pre-university and I did my BSc. In my BSc is when I took up psychology along with chemistry and botany.
That's true.
And then I got interested in it, and I did my master's in clinical psychology. That was interesting too. But I never expected to be working or have a career, because I'm generally a very lazy person. I love to eat, relax, and I was okay to get married and just have children and enjoy life. Yeah. And then, of course, I married my husband.
How did this transformation happen?
Yeah, I met my husband during my post-graduation. We got married.
Kiran.
And then, yeah, my husband Kiran, he was my classmate. And then we kind of moved to Singapore after a while.
He played tennis.
Yeah, he played tennis.
And coaches.
He was actually a very good gymnast as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he used to coach. And then I think somewhere there was this unfulfilled dream of sports. I know when I was in high school, we used to get this, World of Sport program for half an hour every weekend. And I used to watch that, and I used to wonder how people get to the Olympics. I didn't know how to get there, but somewhere I think the Olympic rings had kind of stuck in my head. And that was forgotten, actually. We moved to Singapore, and I had to do some more education to get a decent job. That is when I did my PhD. Originally, I was supposed to do a PhD in organizational psychology. But somehow one thing led to the other, and I got interested in sports psychology. But, and yeah, it was not like I wanted to reach Olympics through that, but perhaps at a subconscious level that was there. And I found it very interesting and started working with athletes for my coursework. And it was working well, and then I got referrals from, and in Singapore we have a lot of international coaches. So they gave referrals to their countries, and somehow very early in my life I started working with the elite. And yeah, somehow things, one after the other things went on. And yeah, a few Olympics happened and World Championships and all of that. So it's been a very interesting journey, very fatiguing, but very interesting, very satisfying. and I'm still learning and growing.
How do you think is the grassroots level, middle level, and the elite level category, and how do they how do you cater to their requirements and demands?
So it's a different ball game altogether. When we're talking about grassroots, they have a lot of heart. They're not using so much of head in their game, right? So they're enjoying, and at grassroots level is when they're
They
trying
don't
to
know.
understand.
They're like gods, and
Yeah.
yeah, they don't. They are quite new.
Yeah, and depends on what grassroots we are talking about. If it's a grassroots that was recruited for medals, like some of the state sports ecosystem has, that's a different ball game. They're recruited and becomes a job very soon for them. But assuming we're talking about a grassroots where the kids are just playing and exploring sports and they get interested, and someone spots their talent,
Yeah.
and or they are very stubborn that they want to do it, or parents want it for them. Assuming that's the situation, it's a different ball game, and yeah, it should purely be fun. But unfortunately, in today's day and world, very early in their life, they start competing very early in their life.
True.
And for example, during COVID, I had a request from a football company in Singapore whose athletes are 3 years and 4 years old, and they wanted me to do sports psychology sessions on Zoom for the children. And I recommended to them, how about I speak to the parents?
Quite demanding.
Yeah, however, yeah, and that's where the world has come to. And also keeping in mind that children today are so smart, so intelligent, which is why they use less heart and more thinking, right? And so in terms of sports psychology, I think the parents, the sports ecosystem needs it more, not in terms of managing pressure and anxiety, but also trying to help them get the perspective right, to get them to help them get their approach right, where to help them understand that failure is a very important learning experience, because if you just keep winning, you don't learn much.
True.
Because
sport is not always winning.
And the more they fail is when they actually learn and grow from it, and they need to be used to it, right? But somehow the parents at a very young parents, especially with young children who show promise, kind of attune their self-esteem and self-worth to the endeavor outcomes of these children. So when the children don't perform well, the children are fine generally. If you observe, they might feel a little sad, but then they're okay. They play with their opponents and all of that. But what you see is that the parents are worked up so much, the coaches are worked up, the ecosystem is worked up, because they didn't get the kind of outcome they wanted. And that to me tells that their perspective about their own self-worth as parents and ecosystem is not aligned positively. So that is where it starts. And before they know, they move to the intermediate or development, where it becomes more serious, because now around this age, the kids are chasing high school, secondary school, high secondary school, and also sports. Now the parents also have this responsibility of a child's career.
Good education.
You see. So, so they now become more expectant of outcomes. Outcomes become much more important now
for
the parent.
Both in education as well as in sport.
In education is all right, because education is rather more straightforward. But in sports, it can be anyone's day, it can be anyone's
who's
time.
Winning and losing, yeah.
So all that happens, and that's what you see in the intermediate. And also keeping in mind at the developmental stage, what happens is the children are going through puberty, they're going through adolescence. So they have their own physiological struggles, their self-esteem is very, fragile, you see. So what was now attuned to the self-worth and self-esteem of parents becomes that of the athlete now.
Do you think motivation aspect is quite not to that expected level with maybe teams, maybe franchises, maybe professional level where athletes are practicing so hard to give it back by way of performance?
I think that's a wrong assumption to make, because why would anyone want to go to lose, right? So I think it's not motivation that's the problem, because I think motivation is very high. If at all, I think the issue could be the quality of motivation. So when we talk about motivation, there's an external motivation, there's an internal motivation, correct? There's nothing wrong with being externally motivated. There's nothing wrong to want to do it for medals, for the accolades, to represent the country, to feel the pride. Even if someone has to do it for money, if that is what they want, there's nothing wrong. But that external motivation should not outdo the internal motivation. So the internal motivation should be much higher. So it's not so much whether they have motivation or not, they're very passionate actually, they're highly motivated, but the quality of motivation I think is what needs to be looked at. So if the external motivation is higher than internal motivation, then what happens is the motivation doesn't drop, they take in a lot of pressure, because anything that is external is largely beyond your control. And you're now trying to control things or hoping for things to happen which are beyond your control.
True.
And as an athlete and as a player, having things under control is what you are training for and what you're looking for, and that is what your personality becomes. So there's always this discord between uncontrollable, controllable, and at the outset, because they then don't perform, they become, there's a constant battle with themselves for them. They become victim to their own, internal expectations, external expectations, and when they don't perform, how we generally tend to judge them is like, not so passionate, not so motivated, not willing to work hard, not enough gratitude. But largely that is not what it is.
See, you look like top stars like Osaka, and she said she needed a rest and off from the game. And there are many examples of going into depression at the highest level. Do you think there's much more to it, or you players need to come back after a rest and perform?
So overall what I've seen is this has always been the case. Just that young athletes today are okay to talk about it, are okay to express.
They're coming out now.
Yeah, but this has always been the case. This has always been the case. And because now the age of the athlete is much younger. For example, for Tokyo 2021 or 2020, I had about 28 athletes, and a good 18, 19 of them were 18 years and below in age. So these are young, very talented, very very intelligent, smart athletes, but unfortunately they don't have the benefit of experience in life, managing emotions, being kind to themselves. So self-compassion is lacking.
True.
One is the empathy from the sports ecosystem for these young stars, because they are forever greedy. We always want them to be performant, we want more. Another is these young athletes themselves are less self-compassionate because they don't know better. Another thing that's happening is the biological age of an athlete is much younger, elite athlete. Like I was saying earlier as well, I have about 28 athletes I was working with for Tokyo 2020, and a good 18, 19 of them were 18 years and below, right? So these are very smart, very intelligent athletes, very technically sound, tactically sound. What generally used to take 15 years to master, they can master in like 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. Okay. They could be representing their nation for Olympics, and not just that, they could be podium, probables, correct? But then, unfortunately for these young people, they don't have the benefit of experience of life.